Help Mythvision keep bringing you material by becoming a Patreon member, as well as PayPal. Like, share, subscribe, and comment. Join the Patreon to get early access to videos and check out the website. We are Mythvision. Welcome back to the show, Mythvision Podcast. Your host, Derek Lambert. Guys, prophecy. We did a show last time, Dr. Joshua Bowen, and on his channel, you guys definitely have got to go check out Digital Hammurabi. He gives free education, man. You know, you don't have to go to all of these colleges to learn some of this stuff, especially as expensive as they are. He spent many years researching this, and he talked with me about failed prophecy in Ezekiel. And I, as a Christian, you know, who went full preterism, if you know what that is, you know, there's not a single failed prophecy. The whole Bible is fulfilled. Like, God would never fail, and his word never fails. And so we went through an awesome show there talking about Ezekiel. Some of the stuff we're going to talk about today is going to tie into that. But also, we have our good friend Jim Majors joining us, and he is a PhD candidate in Oklahoma. And soon to hopefully get your dissertation over with this COVID thing going on. Everything's slow as usual. Thank you for both of you guys joining. Go down in the description, everybody. Subscribe to both channels. Help support both of these guys. They're going to be reoccurring guests on this channel. And you're going to learn something interesting today about Jeremiah and Daniel, maybe some more failed prophecies. So stay tuned. Welcome to the channel, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Great to be here.
I'm glad I got both of you guys. So we've got obviously top level scholarship here. Dr. Joshua Bowen. Yeah, I know. Go ahead, Jim. Go ahead. Talk, brother.
I was going to say, I don't know about that.
Well, he's definitely, compared to me, he's beyond.
Dr. Bowen, absolutely, yes.
I'm going to be leaning.
Don't group me.
I'm just going to be leaning on Jim today. That's all.
I don't want to have to work hard.
Yeah, I think we're all just going to stop and let Jim take the whole show over and teach us everything, and we're gone, man.
No, that's really okay.
Okay, guys, real quick question. It's going to be basic fundamental stuff up front, and we're not giving a PowerPoint, even though we can in the future if we want to really delve into this in detail, like Dr. Bowen did last time. I mean, he took us into terms. You're reading the language, you know, so this is stuff I can't even
You're
play
falling
around.
Asleep.
That's kind of what I just said in a sense, you know. You did all the hard work is the point I'm trying to make, and watching that show really helps people understand how well organized Ezekiel was, and you can see the context. Who is Jeremiah? When does this guy supposedly live? And then maybe we'll start with that and then work into what does Daniel have anything to do with this. So Jeremiah, if you would, Dr. Bowen, start us out, and then just or either way, Jim, it doesn't matter.
I'll let Dr. Josh start it off. Is that where you wanted to start off, Dr. Josh, at Jeremiah, or do you want to give some background on that?
Oh yeah, that's fine. You know, so Jeremiah is a prophet that's, you know, doing his work during the fall of the southern part of Israel. So as Judah falls, Jeremiah is there and he's prophesying that destruction is coming from Nebuchadnezzar. You have this repeated phrase, you know, the foe from the north. You know, so Nebuchadnezzar is going to come and bring his forces from the north. And, you know, there's a lot of twists in the book itself. It's a very interesting read, actually, just to go through it for fun. But yeah, so you know, Jeremiah is prophesying about the coming Babylonian destruction and exile that's going to take place. And of course, that plays into what we're going to talk about today. And we can go about this any way that you like. But you know, Jeremiah has you know, some things to say about the exile that's going to, you know, befall the kingdom of Judah and how long they're going to be in Babylon. You know, so he talks about that a couple of times, and there's some people have picked up on this, later writers pick up on this and kind of do different things with it. So it's an interesting progression, I think, that we see.
Jim, would you like to comment on that?
Well, I mean, so my focus, like my focus of study is in Daniel 9. So I'll go from there and I'll work back. So in Daniel 9, you have a prophecy. It opens up in Daniel 9:1. It says, in the first year of Darius, son of, that's debatable. Ahasuerus, is that how you say that, Dr. Josh?
I say Ahasuerus, but yeah, it doesn't matter.
By birth a Mede, who became king over the realm of the Chaldeans. In the first year of his reign, it says, I, Daniel, perceived in these books the number of years that, according to the word of the Lord to the prophet Jeremiah, must be fulfilled for the devastation of Jerusalem. So he, like a good prophet, like any good Old Testament prophet does, he name drops Jeremiah. It's just if you're not a serious prophet if you don't name drop Jeremiah. The 70 years that they're talking about, I guess we can go back to Leviticus 25. 8 through 7 really kind of lines it out really well. It talks about a cycle of 7. It's 6 years of working the land, and on the seventh year, you let it rest, and it starts all over. And this is part of the cycle of the Jubilee. So once you go through these cycles 7 times, you wind up with 490, and that's kind of what we're getting at in Daniel 9.
Maybe Jim, maybe it'd be good, and just break in as I say this, but maybe it'd be good for the listeners to just kind of get a very broad bird's eye view of the general history of the nation of Israel, just so that it sort of sets this in its perspective. So according to the narrative, this is what we're going to be talking about here: the narrative. Okay. Not don't mix this up with what actually happened historically. So the narrative talks about the book of Genesis. Abraham comes in, and all his descendants kind of populate, and then they all, under Joseph and his brothers, they all go down into Egypt, right? And a long period of time passes. They all populate down in Egypt. They become slaves, and God brings them out under Moses, right? We're going very quickly, but so you have the Exodus from Egypt. When they come up out of Egypt, they come into the Promised Land eventually. And they take it over under Joshua. Moses dies. Joshua conquers the land. And then after Joshua, you have this period where you don't have a king, but God raises up individuals called judges that rule over the land, rule over actual areas in the land, to deliver the people that are in trouble. So this is the book of Judges. And then after this, coming into the book of Samuel, the people say, we want a king to be like all the other nations. And that's the opposite of what they're supposed to do, right? And God says, fine, gives them a king. So you have the 3 major kings, from Israel's history: first Saul, then David, then Solomon, right? Those are the big 3. After Solomon, you have this son named Rehoboam, and Rehoboam does some stupid stuff, and the kingdom revolts. The northern part of the nation of Israel rebels. They choose their own king, a guy named Jeroboam. He rules over the 10 northern tribes. Rehoboam stays over the 12. So at this point, you have not a unified Israel. Now you have a divided Israel, 2 tribes in the south, 10 in the north. And they have their own, histories. Well, that goes on until, and this is when we start getting into good history. The 10 northern tribes are conquered in 722 by the Neo-Assyrian Empire. The southern tribes persist for a little while longer than under this period that we're talking about today with Jeremiah and the Neo-Babylonian Empire. They're taken all to the beginning in 597, but ultimately 587, 586, Jerusalem is destroyed, and they all go into captivity, into exile, and they're there in Babylon until it's a little bit less pretty than we would like, but whatever. 539, when the Neo-Babylonian Empire falls, Cyrus, the Persian Empire, does some things to let them go back. And so you have this pre-exilic, exilic, and then the post-exilic periods. So that's sort of broad strokes. Jim, feel free to throw in anything that you think I missed that's important.
You're doing great. You're doing better than I would. I get stuck on something.
But just so to kind of tie in what Jim was saying, Again, sticking kind of with the narrative
Mm.
flow, the law, even though Leviticus was written very late, it doesn't matter. The way that the text is set up, Israel, when it's in the land, when it's in the promised land of Canaan, what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to, you know, farm the land, till the ground
Mm.
for 6 years.
Right.
But then every seventh year, they're supposed to hands off, let the
Mm.
ground lie fallow, let it have its own Sabbath. This section of Leviticus,
Yeah.
the holiness code, which is it's debated now. There's some, you know, does 17 go with it or not, whatever. But
Right.
the point, I think the big point, this is priestly writing, what we're
Yes.
talking about.
Right.
And
A lot
the
of priestly
priests,
language.
that's right, they're very concerned with, you know, cycles, they're concerned with time, they're concerned with purity,
Mm.
um, holiness,
Yep.
obviously, if it's the holiness code. So this
Right.
idea,
That's why I kind of like wanted to lean towards Deuteronomistic. Like,
yeah, I mean, certainly one of the big ties that I think that we can see, and we'll talk about this when we get to chapter 26 of
mm,
Leviticus, but there's this whole blessings and curses thing that takes place, and it's interesting, because again, we have to be able to differentiate between what the narrative is trying to portray
mm,
as history, the history of Israel, and what we know.
right.
Um, but but for our purposes today, I think for the most part, we can focus on what the narrative is trying to do, because I
Okay.
think that's where the interpretation is it's gonna help us. So, you know, Israel's supposed to go 6 years and then let the seventh year just the land lie fallow. And God was going to supernaturally come in and take care of things. He was going to provide them so much food and so much abundance that they wouldn't even need that year. You know, it was, and that cycle of 6 years and then let the seventh year rest. Later writers are going to pick up on this, because what we see in places like Jeremiah, and then later in Zechariah and in Second Chronicles, and then ultimately in Daniel, there's a roughly 70-year period. It's one of the things that when people talk about biblical prophecy, that's one of the prophecies that I wish they would go to more, because
It's
it's
a
like
good
the
one.
one that they got pretty damn close, you
Yeah.
know. It's only a couple years off. So so Israel is Judah is in exile for, you know, depending where you start it, whatever, 609 to 539 is sort of where, you know,
Right.
later interpreters fell on that, but no, it's roughly 70 years that they're there. And so the question, what later interpreters are going to wrestle with is, um particularly when we get to Daniel, and as I say this, Jim is going to have like 10,000 things that he could say about it. Um, but why is it that the 70 years come and go, and God has not broken in to, you know, to deliver his people
Mm.
and to
May I
restore?
tune in? May I tune in? I want to
Yeah.
get somewhere because I'm ignorant on this, and I'm going to ask you, Jim, if you don't mind. Maybe you and Dr. Bowen can respond to this, but I don't know the details in the prophets, and let's pretend we're Israelites in antiquity according to the narrative. Okay,
Okay.
and in the narrative they're expecting something to come. They're like, okay, not only will we come back from exile, something else is supposed to happen. We talked about prior to doing the show that there's supposed to be a failed prophecy here, or something didn't happen that they were expecting
Right.
to happen. What is that they're expecting? And I think you were getting to this somewhat, Dr. Bowen, but apart from the fact that I'm simply
Well,
going to bring, the
he was getting
exiles
to it.
back.
I mean, he was right there at it.
Yeah, I mean, so the big thing, and you know, this develops later in the Second Temple period. These, you know, good and evil start to, you know, you start to get this dualistic idea. There's good supernatural and there's bad supernatural. That becomes more pronounced. But the big question that people have is they're expecting the Davidic throne, you know, the throne of David, to ultimately endure, right? So you have passages, you know, like in 2 Samuel 7, that talk about the Davidic throne and the Davidic line, and there's always going to be this king after David's line that's going to sit on the throne. And so what ends up happening, and seriously, Jim, like just break in and say I'm going to take it from here. Um, but what ends up happening is later writers look back at this period of exile, and particularly to Jeremiah's statement about, and maybe we can, should we put it up on the screen? I'm not sure. We can read it. Maybe. So down in verse 8, I'm going to read it from the NIV because it's my favorite. Therefore, the Lord Almighty says this, because you have not listened to my words, I will summon all the peoples of the north. And if you picture where Israel is, in order for people to get to Israel, if you look at it on a map, you would think, well, they can just cut across the desert, right? They'd be coming from the east, but that's not how it works. They go up, the Euphrates, and then they come down into Israel. So that fertile crescent, they call it. So they're coming from the north, from Israel's perspective. So anyway,
Down to the valley.
That's right. So I lost my place. Okay. All the peoples of the north and my servant Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, declares the Lord, and I will bring them against this land and its inhabitants and all the surrounding nations. I will completely destroy them and make them an object of horror and scorn and everlasting ruin. Verse 10, I will banish from them the sounds of joy and gladness and the voices of the bride and the bridegroom and the sound of millstones and the light of the lamp. This whole country will become a desolate wasteland, and the nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Now, what he means here is, it sounds weird for me to say this, but sort of irrelevant. And it's debated, right? Does he mean a finite period of time? Is he just saying, like what we see in, what is it, Psalm 90, where it talks about the lifetime of a person, being, yeah, there are parallels to it, I think, in Esarhaddon.
And it's problematic because the nature of the language, the more ambiguous it is, the more meanings you'll have try to be attached to it. And so from the get-go, you already have multiple interpretations of what it is.
And it works beautifully for what we're going to talk about, because that allows, so you got to think Jeremiah is writing, early 6th century BCE. So this allows these later interpreters to kind of play with it and interpret and reinterpret it as necessary. So,
wow.
So maybe to sort of go ahead.
I was going to ask you if you just wanted to just outline what the 70 was in Jeremiah, and we can connect that to Daniel.
Yeah, so I mean, what he actually intended by it, I think, isn't terribly germane for us to really nail down, because I don't know that I could, because it's hard for me to know what precisely he's talking about, in my opinion, whether it's this life of a human being or if it's actually strictly talking about 70 years. But what's key is that later interpreters pick up on this. And actually, I should pull up First Chronicles, which is a later text, and we could also talk about Zechariah 1 if you want. But I think First Chronicles is the one that. Sorry, not First Chronicles, Second Chronicles. You guys were thinking, man, what's wrong with that guy?
And Daniel is one of these people who picks up on Jeremiah's prophecy and kind of puts his own spin on it. He applies it as he sees the world, and that's kind of what people do with prophetic texts even today. They'll take a text and they'll lay it up against something, and they'll spin it and they'll zoom in and zoom out and try to make it fit their context.
Interesting.
So according to Daniel, he's already been in exile, so he determines that these 70 years that are given by Jeremiah in 25 and 29, that he's already in the process of serving that time. So he's only got 70 years, and so Daniel realizes, okay, well, so God's going to forgive us. I need to ask for forgiveness. I need to beg Him to take His people back, to just confess our sins, and we need to become pure again. We need to restore Jerusalem. Well, restore Israel, really. And so at this point, a messenger appears to him, Gabriel, and says that hey, that's not all. It's not just the 70 years. It's actually wrong. Actually, Jeremiah, when he was saying 70 years, it's actually 70 weeks of years. So that's usually interpreted as 77s, but that's not how it's written out. It's not written out just as straight up 70. So let me get some. Well, I don't know. Is that important?
I think so. I mean, well, maybe you're getting lost in the weeds. I don't know, but Dr. Josh could tell me. But I think we're getting to something that's important for a layperson like me, I mean, I know some things, but I'm not like any scholar in this, and I don't know it inside out. So my question is, where does this failed prophecy play a role from a standard that we would be strict on saying this didn't happen during Jeremiah's time when they said it would? And why is Daniel having to rehash something? If Jeremiah said it and it was supposed to happen, whether it was 70 years or a human lifetime, doesn't matter. Like what didn't happen is my question ultimately.
Well, there's different opinions on that, just because Daniel is such it's an amalgamation of a text. It's really three parts, and each of those three parts are like 10 other parts. It's really, really complex. You got 1 through 6, I'd say is a group, and we're talking like 4th to maybe early 6th century BCE. And I would even put chapter 7 in there. Some scholars wouldn't put 7 in there, and then
I think, just as a side note, I think early 6th, for the Aramaic of Daniel's probably
for the Aramaic, absolutely, yes.
But I think it's very.
The more liberal scholars say late 5th, and that's as far as they'll budge. But I have no problem seeing early 6th.
Yeah, I would say I'm probably one of them that would say. I was going to say I think it's probably too generous, but the Aramaic's not really terribly important to the dating of the book, interestingly enough. But go ahead. We don't want to go down that.
But I mean, yeah, just as a side note, just for me, it wasn't so much like the status of the word at the time or anything. It was just that it's unexpected. You just wouldn't expect it in a 5th century text.
I think maybe something to sort of step back and have everybody kind of recognize or wrap their head around is that first part that you talked about. So in Daniel 9, again, going with the narrative, and you have to think this is a 2nd century book, right? They're putting this thing together in 2nd century during the time of Antiochus, the 4th Epiphanies, and there's a reason for that. But if we just stay with the narrative itself, there's a lot that we can really make sense of.
So let's start at Jeremiah 29:10 then. Jeremiah 29:10 says that this is to restore Israel, and it references King Cyrus of Persia, and his decree, and it's in the Cyrus cylinder, I believe, and it's it's not. Actually, I don't believe the Jews are mentioned in it, but basically what is it's a list of nations that are allowed to come back in and to bring their gods, their idols with them. But we know that at least some Jews did go, even though they're not directly referenced. There might be another lost source that we don't have, but so they do come back, and in the context of Jeremiah, that is where the 490 years begins. I'm sorry, in Daniel. And so from 538 is where we start counting on that. the 490 years. Um,
But I think maybe the rationale for like this seems very arbitrary,
mhm.
right? If from what we've talked about, it could seem to the listener arbitrary. Now, obviously for
Right.
you, Jim, it's not arbitrary. You understand it.
No, he knows
Um,
it.
Yeah, I know. I didn't want to get off in the weeds, but yeah, I don't know how much his listeners know
but
about Daniel.
I think
I
it's
guess I shouldn't
important.
assume.
I think it's important to understand. So, what Daniel does in Daniel 9, when he does this thing where, as Jim talked about, said, I've got to pray and repent for the nation. The question might be, why? Like, what's
Mm.
motivating that? And I think it's good to go back to Leviticus 26 at this point. So, if you remember, if the listeners remembering, Leviticus 25 is where 25 and 26 kind of go together. And in 25, Jim mentioned about this Sabbath year. So every seventh year, you're supposed to let the land lie fallow, right? So in Leviticus 26, there's this whole series of not stipulations, but blessings and curses that will come upon the nation if they obey the law, if they obey God's commands, if they do things like let the land lie fallow every seventh year. If they do these things, then God's going to bless them. And you can read about, we won't read it here because it's a long chapter, but, he's going to give them rain in due season, going to give them power over their enemies, give them long life in the land, all these great things, the things that they want. And of course, the things that they're going to get, hopefully in the millennial kingdom that they're anticipating. All these things is what they're that what's gonna these are the things that are gonna come to them.
Mm.
Of course, in the narrative, we know that's not what they did. And the narrative then says, and I'll just read one of them here at the end of Leviticus 26. So he says, verse 27, if in spite of this, you still do not listen to me, but continue to be hostile toward me, this is God speaking, then in my anger, I will be hostile toward you, and I will punish you for your sins 7 times over.
Right.
And that's really important, I think, for this.
Yeah. That's pretty much what most scholars believe is that 70 has a lot to do with it, because it's to multiply it is essentially what it's saying, that if you that I will forget, like, here are the circumstances of this covenant, of this promise to restore, but if you don't hold up your end of the deal, I'm going to pay you back 7 times more.
Let me ask you guys something real quick on this, because I'm trying to speak from 101, if you will. The guys like me who are watching who might go, I'm not fully acquainted with all this. I'm taking notes. I'm hearing what you're saying. God has blessings and curses in Leviticus 26. And if they don't obey, they're going to get curses. If they obey, there's going to be blessings, all that kind of stuff. And here's the 7 times thing, which is where they end up getting this strange thing in Daniel, talking about the 490. Because anyone who knows a little bit of math, 7 times 7 is 49. Okay, so you add a 0 and you got a 490. Well, I just mentioned that to say, I think that a lot of this responsibility for anyone who's watching, I'm not trying to be funny, especially if you're a believer here, but I think that there's going to be some responsibility you're going to have to put on Yahweh, because what's going to end up happening is God has these promises of restoration, and he has some promises that almost like, after this, then I'm going to do something. I'm going to do something good for you. And if it doesn't happen, what are you going to do? What do you say to that? I mean, are you going to say, well, we're missing something here. You guys still disobeyed. But God said he would be the one who would restore you, that he would make sure that his people would come back, or whatever it might mean, or how it's supposed to happen. So when does God share the responsibility of his promises of blessings and curses, or is it a completely human thing? Anyway, I just wanted to say that up front, because I think we're going to get into some problems that happen here.
Yeah. And I think, because I think once we get to that, Jim's going to have like all kinds of data that he can lay out here.
Yeah, I'm trying to be quiet until he gets into Daniel.
No, because I want to make sure that that everybody kind of has this backdrop. So why, again, the question remains, if we have this language here about let the land rest every 7th year, and if you still harden your heart and disobey me, I'm going to punish you 7 times more for your sins. This is a trope. Then down in verse 36 of Leviticus 26, as for those of you who are left, I will make their hearts so fearful in the lands of their enemies that the sound of a wind-blown leaf will put them to flight. So there's all these things. Verse 38, you will perish among the nations.
It
The
gets
land
good.
of your enemies will devour you, right? Those of you who are left will waste away in the land. Ancestors' sins, they will waste away. Verse 40, but if they will confess their sins and the sins of their ancestors, their unfaithfulness and their hostility toward me, which made me hostile toward them, so that I sent them into the land of their enemies, then when their uncircumcised hearts are humbled and they pay for their sin, I will remember my covenant with Jacob and my covenant with Isaac and my covenant with Abraham, and I will remember the land. So I get goosebumps whenever I do this, oddly enough. So
I love that.
so then when you think about what Daniel does, again, in the narrative, Daniel realizes by books, right? He's ostensibly reading Jeremiah and going, well, hot damn, 70 years, we're about there, right? And he prays, or we are there, however it is, and he prays. He doesn't just go, well, it's a coming, right? He goes, oh shit.
I got to say something here, Josh. This is really important for anyone who's missing this context. If it weren't for your last episodes and us talking about Daniel, when you say 70 years, we're about there, or we're there, let me pause for the scholarly and separate it for the basic, people like me. Remember, Daniel's setting is not during Antiochus Epiphanes according to the narrative. Okay.
Right.
We're talking scholar and real history when we talk about that, but it's back in towards the Babylonian captivity times and whatnot, and Persia's coming on the scene and whatnot. So I say that for anyone who's listening, there's this not really much of a gap between the story of Jeremiah and the story of Daniel. But when Daniel really takes place, at least chapters 8, I'll give you, Jim, the benefit of the doubt, 8 through 12, and just say, hey, this is Antiochus Epiphanes era. This is 2nd century BC, most likely. So anyway, please, I don't want them to lose track. Continue and maybe rephrase what you just said there, Dr. Josh, because I think it's important.
So when you think about what Daniel's doing, Daniel realizes that the 70 years have transpired, or really, really close to having transpired, and he says, the time's almost up, right? We're getting ready to go back, but there's something that has to happen first, and the thing that has to happen first is we have to repent, right? We have to turn. And so if you think about, Jim, you read it, but I'll pull it up again real quick. In the first year of Darius, son of Xerxes, a Mede by descent, one who made the ruler from Babylonian, one made ruler over the Babylonian kingdom. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood from the scriptures, according to the word of the Lord given to Jeremiah the prophet, that the desolation of Jerusalem would last 70 years. So I turned to the Lord God and pleaded with him in prayer and petition and fasting with sackcloth and ashes. And I prayed and confessed, prayed to the Lord my God and confessed, Lord, O great and awesome, who keeps his covenant with love, with those who love him and keep his commandments, we have sinned and done wrong, right? We have been wicked and rebelled. So he apologizes, he's repenting for the nation and for all these things that have done. So I guess the point is that he's recognizing the curses have befallen Israel, so much so that they've finally gone into exile. And not to go off on anything, but you can read Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, and you can make connections to what happens in Israel's history. The one that I always like to point out is when Elisha, is coming up, having taken taken Elijah's mantle, and these children come out and say, "Go up, thou bald head! Go up, thou bald head!" Which is my King James version quoting there, because that's how I memorized it.
Baldy.
Yeah. Elisha turns and curses them. And what happens? Two she-bears come out of the woods. Well, and kill, sorry, I need to finish that, and kill 42 kids.
42 of the males, yeah. 42 boys, it says. Didn't kill any girls.
So, where is it in? I'm trying to find it where. Yeah. Verse 21 of Leviticus 26. If you remain hostile toward me and refuse to listen to me, I will multiply your afflictions 7 times over as your sins deserve. I will send wild animals against you, and they will rob you of your children, destroy your cattle, and make you few in number so that your roads will be deserted. So, the idea that's supposed to come across to the reader here is that Daniel's recognizing, well, damn, we've rebelled and God has kept his word and God has sent all these curses upon us. So now it's time for me to repent, and repent not just for me, but for the nation and for those that how we rebelled in the past, and God will then restore. And this is why, so now I think we kind of, Jim can now take this thing over. But this is why when Gabriel comes and says, well, how that thing said 7 times for your sins.
Back up. You broke up for last sentence. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, he didn't break up on mine.
So I don't remember where I don't know where I broke off, but so when Gabriel, I know you're anticipating that when I come down here, it's going to be like, hot damn, you did it. I don't know why I keep saying hot damn today, but you did it, Daniel. You prayed and you win the grand prize. You repented of your sins and now I'm going to restore everything. He says, well, actually, it's it's going to be 7 times 70, right? Because God's going to punish 7 times more for their sins. But Daniel gets the great blessing of having these things revealed to him because he's a good guy. And that's where this 490 from one interpretive aspect, it fits, right? I think John Collins says this is the earliest actual biblical interpretation in the biblical text, right? At least one of the earliest. So you have this 490-year period. Now Jim can go into all this detail about the different interpretations. I can help. But there are different ways that people look at this 490 years and they say, is it a fixed period of time? Is it supposed to be 490 years? Is it sort of like general, just a long period of time? What is it? So, Jim, tell us, what is the answer?
Right. Well, I mean, essentially they thought, 70 years under the thumb here. So one of the interpretations was that the 7 years of Jeremiah, and so yeah, that's right.
Back up a little. We just broke out again. I'm sorry. Internet connection's bad.
Huh?
The internet connection was bad and you broke out. I'm sorry.
And Jim, I'm really sorry. Can I just add one thing that I didn't mention that I think is important, and I think it will be necessary for your explanation. We started talking about letting the land lie fallow every 7 years. Yes. Why did we start off with that? Well, in 2 Chronicles 36, Chronicles is obviously much late. Well, maybe not obviously, but it's much later. It's a late text. And it's another place where they're interpreting what happens to Judah, to the nation of Israel, the southern nation. So in 2 Chronicles 36, verse 20, talking about the new Babylonian Empire, Nebuchadnezzar, he carried into exile to Babylon the remnant who escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him and his successors until the kingdom of Persia came to power. Verse 21, the land enjoyed its Sabbath rests. All the time of its desolation, it rested until the 70 years were completed in fulfillment of the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah. So Chronicles is tying 2 things together. It's taking Jeremiah's prophecy and it's taking Leviticus 26 and it's saying, or Leviticus 25 and 26, and it's saying, okay, this is difficult to do, but like roughly there's 490 years of the monarchy, right? from the time Saul starts reigning, there's like roughly, according to the narrative, whatever, 490 years. So if you think about that, every 7th year, they're supposed to let the land lie fallow. Well, if they're there for nearly 500 years and they don't ever let the land lie fallow, well, that's 70 times they didn't do it.
Right.
So then Second Chronicles is saying, okay, the reason that they were sent into captivity for 70 years was because they didn't give the land that rest every 7th year. And they were there for long enough to have 70 7th years. So for 1 year for every year they didn't let it lie fallow so that the land has its rest. So that's what it's doing. And that's where the rationale comes from. Which again, making these connections, I think back to Leviticus 25 and 26 is really important.
Right.
In this discussion. Sorry, I've talked a lot.
No, it's fine. No,
this is great.
Tie that up, yeah. Like Leviticus 25, it talks about 7 Sabbaths of years. So that's 7 sevens. It says 7 times years. And they say that's the 7 Sabbaths of years amount to a period of 49 years. That's Leviticus 25, 8, 7 or 8. Maybe it's 7 and 8. But yeah, so Daniel is reinterpreting this because these 70 years have come and gone, and it's convenient. Now it's really hard for me to talk about this because my dissertation work is actually about a lot about this, about the selection methodology of the later redactor of the first 6 or 7 chapters. So I'm of the opinion that the later 2nd century BCE redactors, I believe it was chapter 7 through 12, that they specifically chose Daniel 1 through 6 for the narratives and the ties that it had to all of these things that were going on in the 6th century, because even the first part of Daniel, the first 6, 7 chapters, they're not as bad of a liar as the second half of Daniel is, but they're still liars. They're still talking as if they are living in this time when actually they're writing hundreds of years after it, a couple hundred years after it. And then you have these later redactors that come in the 2nd century. They choose these first 6 chapters, and they by the end of the 2nd century CE, they have already compiled the book of Daniel, and I believe that they did it as a means to incite revolution against Roman rule.
There's a relatively new book
I don't want to get too far into that, just because that I don't want to. I mean, I haven't even defended my dissertation yet, so I don't really want to just put that out there.
but in case people do kind of want to get in, there's a relatively new book out. I think did John Collins co-author it, or did he? I don't remember, but it's I'm trying to remember the title. It's like utilizing the apocalyptic genre to and now I want to go pull it off the shelf. But it's utilizing the apocalyptic genre to it's something like incite revolt or something like that. Do you remember? You know what book I'm talking about?
Now
I want to go pull it off the shelf. I think he either co-authored it or maybe he was an editor. I don't remember.
I'm not near my bookshelf, but I'm looking at my PDFs.
So I gotta ask you guys. The dummies got to speak up here.
It's complex, man. It's really incredibly complex.
And I've been talking for a while, so thank you.
No, I'm keeping up with what you're saying, but if there's anyone who hasn't heard some of the things you were saying, they're clicking on this video and they're saying, okay, Derek, you said there's some failed prophecy from Jeremiah to Daniel. This is a lot of information. There's a lot of detail here, and maybe it's over their head. Can you break down real simply, Jim? Because I know you've gone on, Dr. Bowen. I think Jim is in the Daniel phase. Daniel is trying to redeem a problem, I think, that Jeremiah is creating by saying 70 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Well,
can you break this down?
The problem there, when we're talking about Daniel 9, when we're talking about the interpretation of the 490 years, there is no one decided start date or end date. Like, the scholarship is still ongoing on that. No, nobody's come to a definitive conclusion. The most popular one is starting off in 444, 445 BCE, the decree of Nehemiah. But there are several other ones. So whenever it's talking about failed prophecy, really all of them fail. You have your Jewish interpretations. You have you have your I guess what you could call the Orthodox position. You had a later rabbinical interpretation. You had everything in between. Then you had Christian interpretations of it, of course, to make Jesus apply to this this one, like a son of man figure, the Messiah, if you will.
So let me ask you this then, to probe, going back into the author of Daniel, and let's not go too much further, because we can get lost into the Jesus stuff, and this is later. If we're looking at Daniel, what is Daniel doing using Jeremiah's 70 years? Well, like, is he saying, look, any time now, but really he's fixing a problem here by using this?
The way Daniel's portraying it, the 70 weeks start with a word or a decree, and it's a period of 70 initial years, right? And so Daniel's looking to see what he can apply this to. The readers of Daniel are looking to see who they apply this to. The people who are later using it as a source document are trying to see what they can apply it to in their timeline. But they have to start with a decree. This the 70 years. So let's just say let's talk about like what the rabbis would have looked at, like from like the Second Temple, right? Jeremiah 29:10 says that after these 70 years are accomplished, that he is going to remember Israel. He's going to perform his good word toward them, and he's going to return them to Israel and restore it. And that after that 70 years, that it would be desolate and waste. That he would restore it back to its former glory. And this is,
let me ask you, did he do that?
What's that?
And this is, if I could, because like
yes, absolutely.
I think what Derek, if you're, correct me if I'm wrong, what you're getting at, setting aside for a second what the 490 years were,
right?
Why are we even dealing with this? And I think if we step out of the narrative for a second, and step into, the actual, what actually happened in history.
Right.
Jim has said it several times. This is a 2nd century text. So you have people in the 2nd century. They've undergone, the Babylonian captivity has ended. They've been able to go back and rebuild this, much, much smaller, temple that makes everybody weep, that saw the first temple, right? Because it's just so, it's just not the same temple. And the people in the 2nd century, they've undergone Persian rule. Now they're under the Greek rule, Seleucid Empire, and they're like, what the hell? Now we've got this douchebag, Antiochus Epiphanes, right? And like, where's the glory? Where's the restored Israel, the restored Judah and Jerusalem? What are we doing? Because now like we're looking around, we're not on top. We're not top cat. We're still, the bottom rung. Everybody's on top of us. Everybody's, using us and beating on us. What's the deal? How do we rationalize what we see in Jeremiah, what we see that 70 years were supposed to come and then God was going to take it all back. And now there's a question that has to be dealt with. And so the reason that the compiler of Daniel, or whoever put this thing together, is coming at this is to say, this is all part of God's plan. Don't you for a second think that God failed a prophecy, even though it sure as hell seems like he did.
And just so you don't think it is, he's going to send he's going to send Gabriel, this angel, this messenger, and he's not just going to prophesy just something in your lifetime. He's going to prophesy something so far ahead that the people who will be reading this text will look at it and marvel at how accurate he is.
Right.
Exactly.
Pretending to be written in like 5th, 6th century BC, whereas it's really 400 years later.
And you can tell, even when you're looking at chapters 1 through 6, we can look at this, we can find historical inaccuracies. It doesn't read like a text that is written by somebody who was living in that time, because they would know who their king is. They would know who the son of their king is. They would know what their name is. Simple things like that. But
I love it.
As it progresses, as we get closer to the 2nd century, as we get closer to this point of compilation of the book of Daniel, all of a sudden it gains adherence and
detail.
You can better conceive it, and things are like clicking. Even like with the most figurative language, people are still coming to definitive conclusions about what these represent. Just because it's so accurate, the things that are going on with the Persians and the Medes and the Babylonians in Rome, it's just all of the imagery is just too good to be true. So Daniel's really setting himself up to be one hell of a prophet.
But this is the rationale that everybody is having as they come to particularly biblical prophecies. Because see, I don't want to say that every new prophecy sort of shoots the future interpreters in the leg or something, and it causes problem, but it does, right? So you have 1st century CE, I think they're 1st century, maybe 2nd century, looking at this text. I thought it was Josephus that said this, but looking at Daniel and saying, well, actually, I know it says Greece, but he just didn't quite understand. It's actually Rome that's supposed to be, that 4th kingdom. And so, and this is the problem that we see, right? So I actually want to read something that's.
But I just want to add one thing. It's really important to not give Josephus too much credit here, because these people who are reading it, they didn't know that it was a 2nd century writer either.
Yeah.
Oh, you mean they didn't know that Daniel didn't exist in the 2nd century? They think he's back in the time.
From the time of compilation, these redactors somehow pulled off this awesome hoax, this awesome scheme that this prophetic book, Daniel, which was already authoritative to them. So these stories were earlier oral traditions and written traditions that they were already very familiar with. So it was super easy for them to associate with. So with the familiarity of these old texts that they already knew from that their grandmother's grandmother told them, to the modern day seeming predictions that this book is making, they just latched onto it real quick. They had no trouble accepting its authenticity as a prophetic text.
Dr. Bowen.
Well, I think that's the thing to bear in mind through all of this, is that the problem that they're trying to wrestle with is the same problem that later interpreters wrestle with, down to, I was a dispensationalist, an ultra dispensationalist when I was a Christian. And it's the same problem that I was dealing with. Because, all right, let's just go with it for a second and say, all right, the 490 years is actually 490 years. And, Sir Robert Anderson was right. And it is the day that Jesus rode that rode that donkey in, right? rode the camel, rode that donkey. And that's the day that's the end of the 490 years, right? Period. We still have a problem,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Because
and
we're talking about this eschatological theme, whereas the end of time, the resurrection, maybe not a physical resurrection, but a resurrection. This was something that was going to be a real event, even though it's figurative language. This was something that they were looking forward to.
And this is why, like, that requires an explanation all its own, because, all right, so this is why when you see that the breakup of the 62 weeks and the 7 weeks, however it is, I mean, the final week, 7 and then 6, anyway, 7, 62 and 1. Right. However it is that you do that, I mean, the way that we wrestled with it was we said, okay, 483 years, that ends at the crucifixion, right around there.
Right.
But then, God gives a little bit of grace, but then
we're waiting for that third period to start. Just waiting for that last week.
But this is why when when Saul is there, I mean, when Stephen gets stoned in Acts chapter 8, yes, that he looks up into heaven and he sees the Son of Man standing at the right hand of the Father. Well, when does he stand? He stands in judgment.
Anticipating it. He wasn't supposed to get his throne until when?
Yeah, but this is the problem, right? Yep. So now God's getting ready. This is when the final week is coming, this tribulation period. I mean, it's a whole system. But why? Why didn't it come? Why no 7-year tribulation period? It's because God, in his mercy and in his grace, reached down and saved the leader of the rebellion, Saul of Tarsus, and right, converted him to, now he's Paul, and ushered in the dispensation of the grace of God. And now that 7-year tribulation period is held in abeyance for God knows how long.
It's right? Almost like another angel came and said, "Oh, by the way, Gabriel said that, but listen, my name's Michael, and I want to tell you." No, I'm just kidding.
but that's problematic because I mean, it might have been great for the people who were being persecuted at the time to get a little bit of relief in knowing that they could anticipate the coming of God's kingdom, because that's what this all was. This eschatological end, it wasn't just the end of the world, but it was the start of a new one. That's God's right, kingdom. Right, and Israel back on top, baby. And then what happens? Then they get passed around. They get passed around from the Babylonians, the Persians, the Medes to the Romans. They're just getting bullied. And I mean, I'm honestly surprised that they were able to maintain a sense of identity through everything that they went through, and as spread out as they were. It's amazing, really. But the fact is, whenever they come back together, they have to account for it somehow, because they all know that Jeremiah prophesied this and it didn't happen. So God's got some splaining to do, Lucy.
Right. So that's the thing. Yeah. Go ahead, Dr. Josh. I don't want to.
And I was just going to say, sort of to put the the cherry on top, is this was the expectation of Jesus.
Yes.
And this was the expectation of Paul. Yes. So when you read Mark 13 and you read, is it Mark 13? I think. And certainly Matthew 24.
The temple, yeah.
Surely I say to you, there's some today who will not die until
standing here today. That's this generation.
This generation will not pass.
And Paul, I mean, think about it. 1 Thessalonians 4. We who are alive and remain.
Yes.
It's us. We'll be caught
Matthew
up into
16, 27 through 28, he says, "Some of you standing here will not taste death till you see the Son of Man coming in the glory."
Sure. That's right.
It was even to the point to where, hey, if you can't keep eating your pants, just don't get married. Just don't worry about that, because you don't want to have to worry about this extra stuff, because he's coming back real soon.
It's almost like the eschatology, this purposeful end. It's like, dude, guys, we keep having to fix this. The end has got to be near, because we can't keep piggybacking. Like you said, Dr. Bowen, I want to kind of break this down real quick, real simple. I love how you said that these prophets that are written as if they're back here, which are written later, are by incident shooting the next guy in the leg and saying, "I hope you make it. in your time, figure out how you're going to fix this problem that I just created for you,
Kicking
because
the can down the road.
they screwed it up. Because I
but
want to
they don't
start
have to
with
worry about it.
70 years Jeremiah. It falls through, which is why he has to place himself back in these times to say, we got to fix this. And then an angel appears to him during the time, supposedly. Actually, it's 70 weeks of years, 490. And then boom, now you're in Antiochus Epiphanes' time.
Sure.
And yet
And
he's
then
still pointing.
whenever, was it Daniel chapter 11, verse 35, I believe, is where the prophecies take a bad turn. Up until that point,
Tell me something about that. I just cannot wait.
up until that point, like they're nailing the prophecies until they predict the death of Antiochus. But I'm convinced. I believe that he died in a temple. He was killed in a temple, raiding a temple. Probably by one of Matthias's boys. But that wasn't the like he was supposed to take over Ethiopia. He was supposed to take over Egypt. He was supposed to do all of these things after he had already died in real life. So that's actually the best way that we date that text is because it's accurate up until that point, and we can actually pinpoint it, like 167, 164, 165. Like we can get pretty dang close.
Wow.
And if you think about the people that are living at that time and the message that the book is what its point is, what that text is doing. Let's say the three of us are living there, and I mean, hell, it's hell on earth for us, right? And people like Derek, I wanna go and I wanna do away with this whole Jewish thing, because that's just nothing but heartache, and I wanna go and take part in the now. But like the purpose of this is for you to say, whoa, look at all these prophecies that came true, and God, look how accurate it's been. And man, we are right there. Man, just hold on a little bit longer, because if you could just hang on for another little bit, God's coming.
Right. And Daniel, the author of Daniel, they're being persecuted under Antiochus right now. Jews are being persecuted hardcore. And so the author of Daniel is doing this to give his people hope, to get them through to the next day, so they don't lose their faith, because they're hoping that they can get their lands redeemed and restored back unto them. So Daniel takes he selects these texts purposefully, I believe, because you have these early court narratives that talk about Daniel and what he went through while he was a prisoner, essentially him and the other young boys who were taken with him by these Gentile kings. And let's see where to go from there. Okay, so they like Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. Everybody knows that good story. I don't know why they insist on using those names, but I'm sorry, Dr. Josh, they're stuck with me. That's who they are now. I'm sorry. And they really amp up the suffering. Not to say that the Jews weren't persecuted, because they were, but they were mainly driven from their lands and forced to give libations to these false gods that they didn't want to. It just really made life hard for them. But Daniel uses these tales that makes them even more scared about people getting burned in furnaces and stuff like that, but about being saved by this one, like a son of man, and being able to be redeemed thanks to this help, and it's slowly being identified as God helping his people again. So Daniel builds off of these early texts, like Daniel in the lion's den.
This is an interesting point, Jim, you're bringing out, and I think that's the heart of what I was wanting, right? Like I knew we have to talk about the technical stuff. I get it. But that's not where my hairs on my arms stand up. The hairs on my arms stand up for me when it's like, aha, I'm seeing behind the curtain. I see the magic trick and you're unfolding it and breaking it down. And you're doing a great job here because
And
if what you're saying is true in this 490 years that the Gabriel angel's saying is really trying to fix a 70-year problem that's going back in time, Christianity's based off of a false prophecy from the basis. It's eschatological ending. It's the entire thing is set up using Daniel, which has its problems. It's already got its problems. And here you are with the
well, I
Son of
mean,
Man supposed to be Jesus.
arguably, you could say that Christianity established a prophecy that is based on a failed prophecy that is based on a failed prophecy because
Right.
of Revelation.
Tell us about that. I mean, I
Oh
gotta hear this.
that's
Yeah.
Okay, well, you can't do
that's
that to me, so now
we
we
get
have
way
to
off-
do
way
another
off the road
show.
on that one.
But that's what I think. That's what's so beautiful, though, about use beautiful here in an interesting way. I think,
I love
but
that. Though.
about modern, theological interpretations of eschatology, and that is that particularly if you have sort of two extremes, as I see it. Not that I'm a theologian, but you have on the one hand your preterist view, right? Your preterist view is it was all done. It was all fulfilled 70 AD, done, right?
All before 70, the whole 490.
Yep, everything's done. Then you have, which I get, I totally understand the rationale. But you're, on the other side, you're sort of ultra dispensational view, which is we're currently in this period of unspecified time.
Millennialist.
Well, it's this, the Hal Lindsey or who wrote Tim LaHaye,
Yeah.
The church is the pause period for Israel. It's pause on Israel, focus on the church at this
That's
time.
right. And it's not the Peter church, right?
Right.
That's different. This is the church, the body of Christ, right? So when you read through, the Pauline epistles, now what you're looking at is this unspecified period of time. We don't know how long it's going to go. Mm-hmm. And right now, the prophetic clock has stopped ticking. Mm-hmm. That's the way that's the verbiage that's used. It's stopped ticking.
I also want to point out that there is a gap in between the first two parts of this 3-part chronology. So I mean, there were some interpretations of it, earlier interpretations of it where all the years ran together, and ideally, that's what they were looking at was 490 years. It's
consecutive.
The messenger didn't say 490 years, and I might throw in some bonuses.
Yeah. And this is but the reason that I think that this has sort of been the interpretation, at least this dispensational view, has been the interpretation that has, if people would stop prophesying, like they could just go indefinitely, is that you're in this period of time now where the prophetic clock is not ticking. It's based on God's grace. Right. Mm-hmm. So when you read about Paul in Ephesians 3, talk about or whoever Ephesians, talk about the dispensation of the grace of God. It's this period of unspecified time. The longer it goes, the better it is for us as humans.
They tied off Romans 9 through 11, where he says the fullness of the Gentiles. We're in the Gentile age. And once all the fullness of the Gentiles comes in, then all Israel shall be saved. And it's like,
but God in his mercy and in his grace extends it. But the moment the rapture happens, and that's the key. The moment the rapture happens, it could happen right now. It could happen in 1,000 years. Obviously, we don't think it'll go 1,000 years.
Right.
But it could. And that's what makes that interpretive model so flexible, right? It's only when doofuses like Harold Camping come along and say, all right, March 21st, 2011 is when it's happening, baby. Then it's like, dispensationalists pulling their hair out. Come on, man, let it be. Let God do it. But that's when the prophetic clock picks back up. You have a 7-year tribulation period, which is Daniel's final week, his 70th week. It all fits together a little too nicely. But that's where I think it's these later interpretations that allow for now this, however long.
Well,
And I think going into the New Testament, Jim, you and me had a great conversation a little bit about preterism the first time we were on the phone together. And just,
mm,
I think there's a variety of there. I don't think all the 27 New Testament books we have, the canon we have,
mm,
are in agreement, eschatologically speaking. I don't think they all think the same way, possibly. I mean,
I
we
agree.
can we can
This,
even
none
show
of them
within
are
this.
logical at all.
Right. And there's a lot of problems there. So I can see why someone's a partial preterist, for example, when they're reading these as sacred text. If you consider what you guys just taught me today and showing us 70 years, but an angel can change that. 490 years, oh, but the Son of God can tell you different. You know, all it takes is something to come on the scene and say, listen, once earthquakes, famines, the army surround Jerusalem, all this stuff happens, the end is not yet, but we're getting there. We're getting close. Get ready. Is
Well,
it, did it
it,
happen or did it
was it?
almost happen?
Yeah, it wasn't quite presented like that. Basically, it was presented to Daniel as in, oh well, you just didn't understand it. It's in code. You just didn't get it. Let me break it down for you.
Okay.
And it had to be that way. I think that's the key to it. Now, from the second century, compiler's point of view, that's what he's doing, right? He's
Right.
saying, all right, how do I rework this?
That
But
makes it a huge fraud, in my opinion. I mean, that just tells you. I understand it's pious.
Right.
There's. I mean, like if you and me
but
had to go to war, wouldn't you say, "I'm going to tell these guys we're going to win"?
but I think we have a very good parallel in the
Okay.
New Testament, right? So I just pulled up 2 Peter 3.
Oh.
So he says, down in verse 3, above all, you must understand that in the last days, scoffers will come, scoffing and following their own evil desires. They will say, where is the coming he promised?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Ever since our ancestors died, everything goes on as it has since the beginning of creation.
Mm-hmm.
But they deliberately forget that long ago, by God's word, the heavens came into being and the earth was formed out of water and by water. By these waters also the world of that time was deluged and destroyed. By the same word, the present heavens and earth are reserved for fire, being kept for the day of judgment and the destruction of the ungodly. But do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. And the Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. Instead,
You, man.
he is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. And this, I think, is the seeds of this, right?
I love you guys.
But I mean, it's beautiful because again, I'm not. How do we understand this? And I really liken this, and then I'm done, and we should probably wrap it up at some point shortly.
Right.
But
yeah.
Well, I mean, I think, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the only way to answer that question, like how do we understand this, is however everybody else did, but there is no way to understand it. I think that the true meaning for the most part is lost to us because I mean Daniel himself, he's using Jeremiah, but he can't completely reconcile what happened there. So I mean, even with Jeremiah, even if we take that he really did get this vision from this messenger from Gabriel, there's still things that he doesn't know that he can't he can't tie in. And even with the first period of 7 years and this period of 62 weeks, and then the second period of 7 years, this last part is the part that trips up Christians because it's not even the start of it. So they say that the end of these first this first 7 and then 62 weeks, these first 69 weeks was led up to Jesus's crucifixion. Some say to his birth, some say to crucifixion. Most say to his crucifixion, and this is usually whenever they're going off of the year 444. And that's fine. They can do that. I understand that there's a gap between the first 7 years and the 62 years. It only stands to reason that there might possibly be a gap between the end of the 62 years, the start of the last period of 7 years. but it's a much longer period, mind you.
A bit.
But even so, if it were to start, it would be 7 years, halfway through which 3.5 years through which, you have the abomination of desolation. The Christians call it the Antichrist would go into the temple and declare himself to be God. All this other stuff, which perfectly fits with Antiochus, with Antiochus Epiphanes. He had just lost a battle. He was really ticked off, passing through Jerusalem, completely wrecks Jerusalem, completely wrecks the temple. They say that he slaughtered a pig, put it on the temple, spread his blood over the Holy of Holies, just desecrated the temple and destroyed it to where literally that's where it stopped. That's where
the clock for the 490 years approximately comes to an end,
not
or
for the 400 and yes, for them. Well, that was 497 or 496 and a half years, and then you had another period of 3.5 years, which was supposed to end with the death of Antiochus and the renewal and the redemption of of God's chosen people and restoring them to their lands. So, all right. So you have this this period of 7 years. Now, how do you apply that to Jesus? When Jesus is to come back in 3.5 years, then the Antichrist is going up into the temple. I mean, what temple? Well, Jesus is the temple, right? If we're looking at Christianity,
here we go.
The stones on the temple is Jesus. So the Antichrist is going to come into Jesus, and then where do we go from there?
Yeah, so
I think these are silly questions, frankly, right, Jim, because we have a video series, right? And it's called Left Behind. So it just answers it.
Go watch the authoritative document here.
Come on, son.
This is fascinating.
I love, man, like how they folded their clothes boot camp style, man. Just
if you guys don't mind, I want to put a pin in this here. I don't want us to stop this conversation. I want eventually we can continue this.
I'm sorry we didn't get further. I just
no. Jim, trust me, brother.
Get bogged down in this.
We can do a part 2 at some point, and we can delve deeper into some of the later stuff, but also tag into other prophets. I know there's more here, guys. We have it uncovered for our audience.
It's my fault, honestly. Dr. Josh wanted to do an outline, and I just thought bullet points would be fine, but we got too bogged down in between the bullet points.
It worked. I think it worked out well.
It did. It worked out great. Dr. Bowen, did you have something that you were going to read or say prior to us getting off of this one?
Yeah, I actually just closed it, but I think there's a really great quote by Golden Gay. That's sort of maybe it's a good place to end this.
Okay.
So I'll read the whole paragraph. It is not surprising that Jews and Christians disagree over the precise 1st century AD starting point for a retrospective interpretation of Gabriel's message of Daniel 9. It might be more surprising that interpreters such as Julius, Eusebius, Hippolytus, Apollinarius, and Tertullian, and their equivalents in the 21st century, who are in broad agreement over an interpretive starting point, disagree over whether, for example, to work back from Jesus' birth or death, and or over whether to work back to Artaxerxes, Darius, or Cyrus, and or over how many days to assume there are in a year, and or over where one locates the final 7 years. Their differences of understanding reflect some inevitable arbitrariness over the starting point, the finishing point, and the method of calculation. And that's where we are.
Bravo.
That is some low-key shade you're throwing there.
So I have to say,
that's John Goldingay. I think he's an evangelical. So
that was actually wonderful, because I think with that, I want to let our audience know, make sure you guys go down in the description. Please help support these guys. Join their YouTube channel, subscribe, like all their stuff, comment on all their stuff.
Pre-order the new book.
Yes.
What's
Dr.
the new book?
Josh has a great book. It's a cursory treatment on Old Testament slavery. You guys, it's super cheap. You can get it on Kindle on Amazon. It's I got it, and it's my go-to reference now.
I appreciate that. I've got one that it should be up for pre-order in the next couple of days. Megan, we're waiting for, I think, the Library of Congress number maybe to come back.
What is it on?
It is called, it's publication of my dissertation, popular level. It's called Learning to Pray in a Dead Language, Education and Invocation in Ancient Sumerian.
Ooh.
So it's all about how, what schools were like in the early second millennium BCE. You know, what was the curriculum like? How did students study? How did they learn to write and read? What sort of text did they copy out? And then it shifts and it talks about how there were certain priests that performed these formalized prayers. They recited these prayers that were to keep the gods from getting really angry and destroying the city. And it shows the connection between the schoolhouse and the temple.
Wow.
And how they affected one another, and then ultimately how that they had certain traditions that came down into the first millennium that affected the Old Testament, that affected the Bible in general, and that affected Western civilization. So it should be good.
So did you get into like the Lamentations and like the destruction of and stuff like that?
Yep. And so there are two types of laments.
Yes.
Those are more in the literary corpus. We do touch on them, but these are ones.
The goddess ones, right?
Yeah, a lot of goddess ones, and it's interesting because, not to bore everybody, but I think this is actually kind of cool.
Ningal or
these yeah, they're written to all kinds of different deities, but the cool thing about it is they have these. They're all different. Many of them, they're not all different. Many of them are just totally different compositions, totally different texts. But they have these 5 or 6 lines, these blocks of text that appear, the same blocks of text appear all over the place, but in completely different compositions. The rest of the text completely different, and trying to make sense of that. And I liken it unto, Jim, if I were to ask you, hey, we're come to Thanksgiving, would you mind giving the Thanksgiving prayer? There are probably 2 or 3 different stock phrases or sets of phrases that you would say, right? What is the one that's always really funny in prayers? We used to always say, bless this food to our bodies, which is a really weird thing to say.
Bless us, O Lord, for these thy gifts which we're about to receive from thy bounty.
Yes. Yep. May we serve you with the strength we gain from it, right? These are stock phrases that appear, but the rest of the prayer would be very, very different. It would be about Thanksgiving, or it would be about something else. But those stock phrases,
a lot of lords.
Yep. They would be, so it's similar to these prayers, but anyway, it shows the relationship between the schoolhouse and the temple, and it should be
interesting.
Should be fun.
Yeah, guys, get the book.
It's a lamentation with like an added layer.
Yeah, it's cool to see the development, and yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited about it.
These blocks of text that are repeating, are they? You think they're oral traditions, or?
Yeah, it's actually my advisor wrote several articles, not a book on this, recently published. But it's interesting because everybody thinks of this linear development. You have oral tradition, and then it gets written down.
It can go
the
other
way. It's just all written down, and that's not how it is.
It can go the other way. A text can get completely lost, turn to oral tradition, and go right back around into textual tradition, which is what I argue my dissertation happened to.
That's cool. That's cool, because what he shows in the Sumerian texts, in these laments, is that actually there's a period where they're running side by side, and you can see them affecting one another, because we actually have the physical copies of tablets,
Sure.
the physical tablets, so you can see the different copies. It's a really interesting phenomenon. So
wow,
anyway,
that's awesome.
But it should be up for pre-order, I would think, this week on Amazon, and then I think it goes live November 1st.
Go
So,
down in the description, guys. The link will be there. Make sure you get it. Help him out. Digital Hammurabi, YouTube, subscribe. And he educates you guys with all sorts of stuff, language, and these type of topics. And he interviews other scholars as well. And then we have Jim Majors as well, YouTube channel. He's debated quite a few people online. And this has been a privilege, guys. Jim, would you like to close us out with something to say?
Man, I just loved hanging out with both of you guys. Sorry we didn't get farther, but yeah, I mean we definitely need to pick this back up because this isn't all us. It's not even close. But I do encourage you that if you're a believer, if you have a set idea of what these 77s are, is a set interpretation, I really encourage you to test it, not necessarily find another one, but just apply it and try to reconcile those last 7 years and like what you think would happen there, and how do you reconcile that with what we know is supposed to happen with the Son of Man returning.
and just to test it, just go pick up a book like this. This is not an atheist, God hater. You just pick up a book like this. Pick up John Collins' book, and just read through and see the problems, right? And the different ways that people do it.
Well, and for somebody who actually cares and will apply the time, you don't have to go and like take all these courses and everything. You can just take this right here. You can take this right here and come
Put it in
to
front of your chest
and come to a pretty dang good understanding.
Put it in front of your chest.
We can't see it. It's screened out. Oh, that's even worse.
Your whole screen. There you go. What is that? The Bible?
Yeah, Bible.
Awesome. Yeah, green screen took over. Ladies and gentlemen, you already know what we're about. We're going to uncover things. We're going to discuss controversial topics. We're not going to shy away from these discussions. And of course, I appreciate both of these guys. You will see more of them on this show. Like I said, visit the description. You guys can help us out, help them out in every way possible. And we really appreciate you tuning in. Thank you guys for joining me for sure.
Thank you.
And with that, do not forget, don't ever forget, we are Mythvision.